Welcome to Webcertain TV. I'm joined today by Emily MacKenzie from Webcertain Translates to talk about the topic of transcreation and explain what makes it different from translation. So, hi Emily.
Hi Gemma.
So can you tell us what transcreation is for those who don't know?
Sure. So the word transcreation derives from translation and recreation. So it's not like your typical translation project in that you still have a source piece of text, but rather than doing a direct translation of it, you allow the translator or the transcreator the freedom to adapt the original source text to make it more suitable for the actual target market. So this way they'll still adhere to the same style, tone and brand guidelines that you set in place, but they'll adapt it so that it will have a better impact in the actual target market than, say, a direct translation would.
Okay, so the difference between this and translation then is it's a bit more of a creative process, I guess, and it's not just exactly what the content, it's not exact replication of the content.
Yeah. So the main difference that you have with transcreation is that you can't use any computer-assisted translation tools. So when you would do a translation, you'd be able to recycle content from a translation memory. But when you alter the structure of the source text, it might be you have a product description that has several bullet points in it. Some of those bullet points might not be relevant to a specific target market, so it may be that a certain feature of a software is not available, so the transcreator would have the freedom to remove that bullet point, or they might want to move the actual paragraph structure as well. And if you were to fiddle around with the structure in a standard translation project, this would completely alter the recycling of content, so you wouldn't get the same reuse that you would in transcreation. And the actual resources who do the transcreation, although they tend to be marketing translators, they're usually of a more senior level, so they have a lot more experience working with marketing collateral, and that's how they're able to add that creative flair to the actual text.
Okay. So in what kind of circumstances would you opt for a transcreation approach as opposed to a translation approach?
Well, it only really applies to marketing translations, marketing content. So you either have the direct translation, which would mostly be advised when you're doing a brochure or something that is very structured. You want the same sort of message to come across no matter what the target market is. But if you're doing things like ad copy, or you have slogans or taglines, these sorts of things, when you're writing it in the source language, in your home language, you tend to add things like idioms or colloquialisms or add those local nuances that when you try and directly translate those, they just don't work at all. And I think the English language is one of those languages where these idioms just cannot come across when you translate them, no matter how hard you try. So the role of the transcreator there would be to come up with possible new slogans that work really well for your particular target market. They would normally provide back translations as well, so making sure that you feel comfortable with what the actual slogan is coming across as. You'd also have things like landing pages. For example, if you were running a local PPC campaign, you couldn't create those ads from scratch. You would never translate those. So you might want to allow a bit more creativity and freedom in the actual landing page as well.
To reflect the ads perhaps.
Yeah, exactly.
Written. Yeah.
And an important element of transcreation that you wouldn't get from translation necessarily is that the transcreator might advise on the actual look of the page as well. So a good example of this would be that if you had, say, a landing page for the UK, you may want to have, a Caucasian model, or you might have brands or testimonials for customers or clients that work in the UK that are well known. But if you just translated that page for, say, the Chinese market, they wouldn't have the same effect because the the customer, the end user, is not going to relate to that at all. So you'd want to consider changing things like the testimonials, have customers or businesses that are more recognisable. And again, you might want to have a local model stand in and change the look of it as well, because you want to invoke the same emotions in the local users, but there's more than just words that you have to take into consideration.
Okay, and then can you share, kind of to put in a bit of context, example of any kind of brand or campaign that has used this approach where it's really worked well?
Well, it's not necessarily a brand, but one of the most cited examples of transcreation in the last sort of 10 years would be in 2004, Marvel Comics and Gotham Entertainment Group actually wanted to launch the Spider-Man comic book series in India. But after doing some initial research and focus groups and things like that, they realised that, Spider-Man swinging through the streets of New York past the Empire State Building was not going to have the same impact as it would if it was an Indian-born Spider-Man swinging past the Taj Mahal. Yeah. So what they did was they transcreated the first initial series of the comic books, and they rewrote the characters so that they were more recognisable to the Indian market. So although the same message was there and the same voice and the morals and things like that still came across, it allowed the youth of India to get this emotional connection. Yeah. So that's a really kind of well-known example. But the one example I can think of from my experience is that there's a client who works with lots of products and services, and they do translate into several languages, but there was one particular market where the message just wasn't coming across. So by transcreating the landing pages, this was Dutch, it actually enabled them to get more sales and generated more engagement with the Dutch market than they had been with just doing pure translation. So you might not want to do it across all languages, but really taking the time to learn about specific markets that you're reaching out to is really important, because you might start with marketing translation and realise, this isn't the best approach for this particular market.
And it's worth kind of considering the other options if it's actually going to have quite a significant impact on how well your campaign or your message is received.
Exactly, and you might not want to do transcreation for all of your marketing collateral. You might just want to do it for things like the landing pages or for any kind of press releases or things like that might be easier to work with creatively than, say, a brochure, a marketing brochure.
So what advice would you give to somebody who's watching this, maybe thinking, well, maybe this is something we should consider? Yeah. What should they think about if they're going to approach it?
Well, transcreation only really works with heavily branded content. So if you've got a really strong strategy in place for how you want your brand to come across, you have things like style and tone of voice guidelines. Yeah. You might even already have thought about localising slogans specifically for those markets. If you have that reference material, then it's going to give the transcreator a lot more reference to work with. So you're not giving them full free rein to change whatever they want when it's your content. As I say, they're just recreating it with that specific market in mind. So
give them as much as you can to help ensure that they're not going to go off on it in the wrong direction for your brand. Yeah.
What's different to translation as well is that you would normally fill out a brief for the transcreator. So having as much sort of guidance there as well. It might be that certain elements of the page you don't want them to touch at all, just to keep it as it is. Whereas other elements, you can say feel free to move things around, or give us maybe 3 or 4 suggestions for a slogan. And the more you work with the transcreator, the more they're going to learn and pick up these things intuitively. So if you're running several campaigns over the course of the year, yes, the first one's probably going to be a bit of trial and error until you get it right, like with anything. But 6 months down the line, they might automatically know the best way to transcreate for your specific customer.
Great. Well, thank you very much for talking to us.
Thank you.